Speaking of that, let's go to Eddie Iranian. Ed, thanks for your patience that I get on these rants. I appreciate it. Eddie live in Cairo today in Egypt. Ed, great to have you with us.
My pleasure, John.
Ed, the Iranian situation, the president last week putting economic sanctions on the foreign minister. And I'm thinking to myself, and I want to get your take on this. Okay, so we're going to put economic sanctions on the foreign minister, freeze his assets. We don't know if he has any assets in the U.S., but isn't this the guy you're negotiating with? I mean, I kind of get why the president did it, and this Treasury Secretary did it. Obviously, they wanted to retaliate. But how does that solve anything?
I don't know that they're going to solve this problem, whether there are sanctions on Dr. Zarif or not. So it's probably just a small provocation. Really, he cannot go to the White House unless his boss says he can, and he knows that Ayatollah Khamenei is not going to let him go. So he's basically playing a game of wasting time because he knows that the Iranian government will not negotiate with President Trump. They're trying to wait him out. He's heard from any number of Democratic Party leaders that they're going to go back to the old agreement after if President Trump loses the election. So he's just buying time. Now, what purpose are these sanctions going to serve? Probably none whatsoever. It may have looked good to a number of people. The people that criticize the Trump administration are saying it's a stupid thing to do. It's all a battle of narratives, really, because it doesn't change anything at this point.
All right, so what's the deal with the British ship that the Iranians seized? We have a new prime minister in Boris Johnson, which kind of stalled efforts. What is going on with that, and when are the Brits going to get their ship back?
Well, I don't think the Iranians are in too much of a hurry to give it back unless they get their ship back from the Strait of Gibraltar. This morning, the Iranian president, Rouhani, was quoted as saying, among other things, that we will not allow your ships free passage through the Strait of Hormuz unless our ships have free passage in the Strait of Gibraltar. It sounds like a good talking point. I think deep down the only way they're going to come to an agreement is if they trade these two ships. Now, at this point, both sides are dug in, and I don't think either side is going to trade one of the ships without getting the other ship back, no matter who is right. And we'll put that aside for the moment. And the president's initiative to protect shipping through the Strait of Hormuz has got Britain on board. Also, we're hearing that the French, the Italians, and the Danes have said they would participate but have yet to do so. The British have two ships in the area, and at this point, the shipping seems to be going through for the most part, other than those British ships. And there was another smaller ship that was stopped by the Iranians, allegedly smuggling fuel. And it's not clear where that's from. We heard various explanations. One, that it was from Iraq. I can't imagine why Iran would be stopping a ship coming from Iraq. But anyway, I've heard some very interesting debates about free shipping through these international passages. Of course, the Dardanelles off of Turkey, that is governed by international statutes dating back to 1888. You've got, of course, the others, the Strait of Gibraltar, but of course, things like the Suez Canal, these are man-made waterways, so the laws are a little bit different. The Egyptians can stop ships from going through that, and so can the Panamanians through the Panama Canal. But the Strait of Hormuz is an international waterway, as are the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus, and they are really protected by international law, allowing ships to go through. So the Iranians are breaking international law, and I think they're winning a lot of enemies on this. You hear various narratives as to the U.S. Winning or losing friends, but it looks like the Iranians are antagonizing more people than we are.
So we're with Eddie Yeranian. Eddie's live in Cairo. Eddie's our man in the Middle East, veteran correspondent, CBS Radio News, Voice of America, and now with the John Fredericks Radio Network. Ed, I want to get your take on if you're the Iranians right now, and if you're Zarif or you're the ruling class there, and I don't mean the rogues, the extremists that run their military. I mean the governing, actually, central administrative power. And do they have an end game here? I mean, when they sit and meet, like where are they going with this? And again, separate out the IRA, which has commanders that are very, very hard line, but they're not making governmental decisions. So separate them out. Separate the IRA out of this, and the governing council in Iran. I mean, where do they think this is going to end up?
I think they're hostage to their leader, to Ayatollah Khamenei. And I think ultimately the only real change in Iran is going to come when he dies. And I think that's the bottom line. Of course, he's not in great health. He's supposed to have prostate cancer. He's supposed to be somewhere over 80. We're not quite sure how much over 80. And his dentures rattle. Of course, that doesn't mean he's in bad health. But the President Rouhani said today in a speech that was carried on Iranian TV and that's being quoted in all the by all the Arab news outlets, that Iran is willing to negotiate with the U.S., but the U.S. has to drop all sanctions first. Of course, that's a non-starter, and he's got to know that, because there will be no reason to negotiate and no pressure if the sanctions are off. So I think he's just saying that because it sounds good, and that's pretty much what they're doing. They're trying to put on a brave face, Dr. Zarif as well, make it look like the U.S. and the Trump administration are the culpable parties here. Perhaps they are. I don't know. I'm not necessarily sure they are. And Iran is going to wait it out, and hopefully to them, President Trump is going to lose the election, and they're going to be dealing with John Kerry again and people like him that will say, okay, we're just going to go back to the old deal. Now, the old deal, of course, the problem with that is it doesn't deal with ballistic missiles, Iran's ballistic missile program, and I think a lot of people question whether Iran isn't secretly still working on its nuclear program in other locations that have not been declared.
Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. Really, you're saying that the short-term proposition for the Iranian regime is to wait Trump out, see if he loses in 2020 and go from there. Much the same policy as the Chinese have right now, and the dictator president, call him a president, is really a dictator Z. Why not just do nothing, lie to them, stall them, do what they did for the last 50 years with 12 presidents, do nothing, stall, and if Trump loses, then they can get back to the negotiating table with a more friendly president to them, like a Biden or a Harris. I mean, Kamala Harris had a press conference after the president ratcheted up more tariffs on the Chinese for not doing anything at the negotiating table and said, elect me president, the tariffs are gone. So if you're the Chinese, you're like, well, why could I deal with this guy, right? Let's just wait. Same thing with the Iranians. Why do anything? Let's just wait it out. If a guy gets beat by one of the Democrats, maybe we can get the Iranian deal back. We'll go from there. Is that a fair assessment, Ed?
Yes, but of course, a lot of people were telling them, including Mr. Kerry, that President Trump was going to be impeached 4 years ago or 3 years ago, and that they would only have to deal with him for a couple of years. You've got to imagine that there's some power greater than ourselves that's up there that's keeping him, protecting him, the president, that is, with all the people that have been gunning for him and trying to pull him down. So I don't know that that's a good strategy, but that does appear to be their strategy.
Let me ask you something. Didn't John Kerry break laws by backdoor negotiating with the Iranians when he was not even part of the U.S. government?
I've heard a lot of people say that he has, but of course Henry Kissinger has been jetting around the world since the end of President Ford's term and talking to world leaders, and God only knows what he's telling them. So I'm not sure it's something other people haven't done, but
Right.
he's been more aggressive about it than Kissinger. He's certainly been more vocal, and he's been quoted a number of times, both with the Palestinians and the Iranians, as going against our foreign policy. Now, I don't know that Henry Kissinger does that openly. Perhaps he's doing it in private, but I think personally that he has broken laws, but a lot of other people have broken laws more seriously and haven't been punished, so I'm sure he won't be punished.
Okay, well, it reminds me to the original sin of this nature, which was when Richard Nixon was running for president against Hubert Humphrey and back-channeled the North Vietnamese and said, don't make a deal with Johnson until I'm there. I'll give you a better deal, remember? And, of course, he was afraid that if Johnson cut a peace deal that Humphrey would win. And, of course, that broke all kinds of laws, and Nixon never was really held accountable to that. Other things, though, obviously did him in. Eddie Yeranian with us here on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Eddie, got 2 minutes. Eddie, let's get to Syria and the Syrian army resuming operations against armed rebels in Idlib. This is the last stronghold that the really anti-Assad forces have. So that ceasefire collapsed. Now the Syrian army moving in, they're bombing them. Eventually they're going to take that back. And then once that is taken back, does Syria become whole again?
Well, certainly with all the people that have left the country or been displaced, it's very difficult to go back to normalcy, go back to the way things were in 2011. Many major cities have been destroyed. So rebuilding them is going to be a major operation. A lot of the men are not going to come back because they don't want to face conscription, even if they aren't thrown in jail, as many people worry they will be. Certainly the most important part about this Idlib equation is getting the roads open, the main highway between Damascus and Aleppo and the road between Aleppo and the coast. Those are major vital thoroughfares, and you really can't run a country if several of your major roads are blocked. So that's part of the equation there. And also having people who are terrorists, whatever you want to call them, on your soil that can mount operations against you in other cities from their stronghold in Idlib. That's obviously not a very good working proposition for the government either. Will we go back to normal? I don't think anywhere in the Middle East is going back to normal after what happened in 2011. Yemen, Egypt, Libya, Syria. I think the whole place is messed up, and perhaps that was part of the game. I think some of the people who were pulling the strings, some of the countries that were pulling the strings, wanted to see the place messed up. And, of course, I've pointed this out before. You've got Brzezinski's book saying, create a mess in the Middle East and you control it.
Well, the NeoCons always seem to get their way in Washington. They have a powerful lobby and quite the media machine, except for me. I'm their enemy. I'm NeoCon public enemy here in D.C., Eddie, number one. That's why I'm in Corey Lewandowski Galactic Milky Way headquarters, and we're barreled in here, Eddie, because I am NeoCon public enemy number one in Swampland. They really don't like me. Thanks for being with us, Ed. You're safe and sound in Cairo. Scott Surville coming up, state senator, Virginia, has something to say about guns, and me and Scott agree on this, that Republicans need to do something lest they face political Armageddon in the suburbs. In your heart, you know I'm right. I'll be right back. Scott Surville coming up.